Well, first of all, thank you guys for being here tonight and coming out. And many thanks, as always, to Tim and Rashmi and Denny for inviting me back, which I'm really flattered. It's kind of amazing that this is the 11th time I've done this. If I look a little more youthful than that number might suggest, that's just what people tell me, I'm not trying to flatter myself, it's just the organic lifestyle. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. So if memory serves, first time I did this was 3 months after the September 11th, 2001 attacks, right? And at the time, we were in a much smaller room, some folks might remember, and the concern then was, why do they hate us? They being Islamic radicals who flew two jetliners full of people and jet fuel in the World Trade Centers. And the message I was kind of suggesting then was less kind of why do they hate us than how can we make more friends in the world. That if we wanted to sort of address the scourge of international terrorism and not have a country vulnerable to attacks like this, that really the key thing was to find a way to tread more lightly on this planet. That how do we go from being this big imperial power, right, to being one republic among a community of nations. As Tim Wadling said at the time, I was working at an organization called Global Exchange. Please check them out. They do really fantastic work. And my friend and co-author, Kevin Danaher, we put out a little pamphlet called No Justice, No Peace. And again, the idea being that if we were able to live a little bit more within our means, if we were able to live more sustainably on this planet, if we didn't have to have U.S. multinational corporations going around the world, clear-cutting forests, drilling for oil, going after scarce mineral resources, and having the U.S. military protect all of that, then we would be in a better position to make friends. And that essentially, it wasn't that, as we were told then by the Bush administration, that people hated Americans or hated the American way of life. It was the consequences of the American way of life that were causing what you could call blowback. Then, the lecture started to change a little bit in the mid-aughts. We went to war, basically under the pretense of fabrications, right? The so-called weapons of mass destruction, the smoking gun that was going to come in the form of a mushroom cloud. And then, of course, we sent hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops to Iraq, and we find out that there are no weapons of mass destruction, that the smoking gun was a phantom menace. And all of a sudden, we've expended and lost 4,400 American lives in Iraq, tens of thousands of people wounded, even more loss of lives, of Iraqi lives. The estimates go as high as 100,000 Iraqis lost their lives in that conflict. And really it was incredible to watch tragedy turn into farce as we watched kind of the first the venality and then basically the incompetence of the Bush administration drag us into this war. Since then, of course, things have changed, right? We got this guy, and we got this guy, and I kind of don't like the things, we even got this joker. And yet, as much as things have changed, and this lecture has changed over the years, some things haven't changed at all. We still have this massive military machine that is kind of astride the globe. And that's what I want to talk about here tonight, is why do we have this massive military that's still sitting astride the globe, right? If we've eliminated some of the causes that were supposedly the reasons why we went to Iraq and Afghanistan, even though the war in Iraq is essentially over, it's not entirely over. I mean, there's anywhere between 3,500 and 5,000 private security contractors there. I mean, that's kind of a lot of mumbo jumbo. That basically means mercenaries that you all are paying for are in Iraq right now. There's still tens of thousands of troops in Afghanistan, despite having, killed Osama bin Laden, despite the fact that there's not really any articulated strategic interest for being there. Despite all of that, the more things change, the more things stay the same. These are U.S. troops leaving Iraq. And yet, we're still spending more than $700 billion on our military. And if you look at that graph, which I just kind of actually found today from the Council on Foreign Relations, you can see very clearly how since 2000, U.S. military spending in constant 2010 dollars has doubled, gone from $350 million to $700 million. So the question is, if we've seen the war in Iraq come essentially to a close. The war in Afghanistan is more or less winding down, and we're still spending $700 billion on this global military. And the question is why? This is the short answer, right? The global U.S. military presence. According to the Pentagon, if you take the Pentagon's own estimates, we've got at least 662 bases in 38 countries around the world. Actually, I was looking at this map, and I want to disclose that there's a little bit of this map shows more than 38 countries, right? But the legend there, so the map is taken from another source. According to some other sources, there's actually close to 1,000 foreign U.S. military bases. So this is not including bases, right, in North America or in Hawaii or U.S. territories like Puerto Rico or Guam. This is 662 U.S. military bases outside of our own borders, okay? And so I ask, where's the peace dividend, right? You look at this chart before here, and after the end of the Cold War in 1988, you see this real decline in U.S. military spending, right? You see a little bit of a bump there, 91, 92, that was the first Gulf War. And then we really kind of get to still a massive military, but one that at least has shrunk after the Cold War, and then we double the size of the U.S. military. And where's the peace dividend today? How come we're not seeing a decline in U.S. military spending? And really, if you want a single graph to kind of take home this evening in your mind, look at this one. So the U.S. spends more on its military than the next 13 military powers combined. I mean, it's not even like we're in the same ballpark as anybody else. The second biggest military after ours is China. And for every $1 that China spends on its military, we spend 6 on ours. You could look at, if you just want to take another kind of image home with you tonight, on the entire planet, there are 21 aircraft carriers, right? The aircraft carrier is basically the number one tool of projecting power, right? You don't need an aircraft carrier if you're just defending your shores. You have an aircraft carrier if you need to take your military force someplace else, but if you need to project power. There's 21 of those things on the planet. 10 of them are owned by the U.S. military. The other 11 are split among other countries. China's got 1. Great Britain just decommissioned their last aircraft carrier. So when it comes to projecting power, when it comes to projecting force, again, we've got the entire rest of the world combined. So my question is, and this is just the one thing I'd really want you to take home this evening, is why? Why do we have a military that is bigger than the next 13 other militaries combined? Why do we have twice as many, or why do we have as many aircraft carriers as the rest of the world combined? What's the need for this, right? What's the great threat that is pressing down on the people of Rohnert Park that we need to have a $700 billion military? Are they, whoever they are, really coming to get us? I would suggest, I don't want to say that I have the answer, but I have a answer. You might agree with it, you might disagree with it. If you disagree with it, I'd love to hear your thoughts after my remarks, or maybe in one of the sections afterwards. I don't know, I might be going to. My answer is that we've got this giant military to support an unsustainable way of life. That essentially we need this to be able to sustain and to keep coming into this country the life, in Dick Cheney's great words, the way of life to which Americans have become accustomed. This isn't a defense budget. This is an offense budget. It's offensive in all senses of the word. This is an offensive military budget. This is not a defense budget. That's like one of the most Orwellian twists of language you can kind of imagine. That this is a defense budget. This is not about defending us. This is about, again, projecting power. And what do I mean by our unsustainable lifestyle? Well, I mean, I guess you can kind of see it here, right? There's mega shopping mall, maybe this, for a second I thought it was San Francisco, but that mall is too big for San Francisco. It's probably in Minneapolis or something. We're 5% of the world's population. We're less than 5% of the world's population here in the United States, and we consume roughly 20% of the world's resources. That's, in a word, unfair. We just couldn't have it. I mean, the math doesn't work out, right? You need multiple planets. We only have one planet. We're not going to get a second planet. We're not going to go to Mars and start digging up uranium or mining water and bringing it back here. We got one planet. If everybody tried to live the way that we live, the way to which, again, as Dick Cheney put it, the lifestyle to which we become accustomed, we just wouldn't all fit. And so essentially, we've got this giant military, I'm arguing, this military that's so much larger than the rest of the world's militaries combined, in order to sustain this disparity, in order to sustain this inherent unfairness. Don't take my word for it, right? I'm just this, 21st century hippie radical. Let's go to George Kennan here. So George Kennan was really one of the architects of U.S. defense strategy after World War II, going into the Cold War. And here's George Kennan writing in 1948. He says, "We've got about 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity. To do so, we'll have to dispense with all sentimentality and daydreaming, and our attention will have to be concentrated everywhere on our immediate national objectives. We should cease to talk about vague and unreal objectives such as human rights, the raising of living standards, and democratization. The day is not far off when we are going to have to deal in straight power concepts. The less we are then hampered by idealistic slogans, the better." Those numbers have changed a little bit, right? In the last, I guess it is now, 70 years, if my math is semi-correct. We're a little bit less of the world's population. We consume about half as much, right, of the entire world economy. All sorts of other folks on this planet want to live the way Americans live. So these numbers have changed a little bit. Again, it's now roughly 5% of the world's population consuming 20% of the world's stuff. But it's basically the same inherent disparity, the same inherent unfairness. And this is essentially the basis of U.S. foreign policy thinking, is how do we maintain this disparity, and also how do we keep the minerals and the oil flowing to us. A good example of kind of American thinking now in the 21st century is the newly formed Africa Command. So, the U.S. military has got all these different commands, right? So there's like the Near East, or what they would call the Middle East Command. There's the Asian Command. There's the European Command. And in 2008, the U.S. military decided it needed an Africa Command. It needed to kind of have a general that was just looking about what's happening in Africa. And here's the way they put it. They said, and this is at the beginning of the congressional report looking at U.S. strategic interests in Africa. This is within the first paragraph of the U.S. Congress's report on why we're doing this. In recent years, analysts and U.S. policymakers have noted Africa's growing strategic importance to U.S. interests. Among those interests are the increasing importance of Africa's natural resources, particularly energy resources. Now, I'm not like making this up. This is in a U.S. government document. You can go to the Federal Register and look it up. This is why we now have thousands of U.S. troops stationed in Africa, because Nigeria, Gabon, parts of Angola, certainly Equatorial Guinea. Boy, you want to Google a place that's got a horrible human rights record, go Google Equatorial Guinea. These places have got massive oil resources, and it's important that we keep those oil resources, which essentially are kind of like the lifeblood of our economy and our society, flowing, right? This is the thing that greases the whole system. If you want to keep the system going, you got to make sure the oil's flowing. And so now we've got a whole new U.S. military command there. Kind of in a separate thing, and I'm sorry I couldn't find any groovy charts to go along with it. Last year, it was about this time, I think it was November, December 2011, President Obama announced the Pacific Pivot. The Pacific Pivot is the idea that we're going to now have to start dedicating a lot more of U.S. military interests to the Pacific region to counter the rise of China, right? Because there can only kind of be two big dogs, two alpha dogs in the whole block. So now all of a sudden we've got 2,500 U.S. Marines stationed in a place called Darwin, Australia, in case they have to fly at a moment's notice someplace in the east to contest any sort of military aggression by China. Now, of course, nobody wants that. The Chinese don't want a war because they're essentially selling us all the stuff they're making and lending us the money so we can buy the stuff in the first place. It's kind of like store credit, right? Chinese loan us money and then we buy stuff from them, and then we loan more money and then we borrow more money and then we buy more stuff. They don't want a war, we don't want a war. But the idea is, if there were a war, the U.S. wants to make sure it's prepared for that. But I digress on that point. Part of the U.S. military command in Africa is the East African country of Djibouti. Djibouti is not an energy drink. It's not a nightclub. It's a little country that's about this big on the Horn of Africa, and there's 1,000 U.S. Marines there right now. Why are there 1,000 U.S. Marines in a country that probably, with the exception of history majors, geography majors, few people in this room would probably heard of till tonight? because that's right on the Red Sea, right? Gulf of Aden. That's right where the main shipping lane is between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. It's a vital sea lane, and of course if that gets cut off, then there's less oil moving around the world, there's less goods moving around the world, there's less metals moving around the world to keep again, our lifestyle going. And by extension, the lifestyle of also people in Europe and Japan and other industrialized wealthy nations. I think, like many of us, I was sharing, I'm just kind of looking at Djibouti on the map there and thinking about the Middle East, thinking about the headlines these days. I know that I, along with many people, was really encouraged by the Arab Spring that happened, right, in the spring of 2011, with all of a sudden democratic people's movements in Tunisia and Egypt and Syria rising up against decades of US-backed dictatorships and demanding democratic freedoms. 3 of the 4 of those so far have been successful in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt, and Syria, of course, now is mired in a brutal civil war. And that was really exciting good news, right? And it was really exciting good news to see US policymakers come out and support it strongly, and in the case of Libya, even dedicate US military assets to those efforts for freedom and democracy. Here's what President Bush, the slip of the tongue. Here's what President Obama said at a May 2011 speech at the State Department. He said, "It will be the policy of the United States to promote reform across the region and to support transitions to democracy." That's fantastic, right? And then here he is, though, in literally like the very next paragraph, because apparently that policy didn't extend to the Persian Gulf Sheikhdom of Bahrain, where at the very same time there was a mass citizens movement, mostly led by majority Shiites against a Sunni-dominated Sheikhdom for their also freedoms and democracies. But President Obama had a much different thing to say about Bahrain. He said, "Bahrain is a long-standing partner, and we are committed to its security. We recognize that Iran has tried to take advantage of the turmoil there, and that the Bahraini government has a legitimate interest in the rule of law." So also we're not talking about freedom and democracy anymore like we were in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Libya and in Syria. Now we're talking about rule of law and security. And sure enough, just a couple weeks later, Saudi Arabia sent troops into Bahrain and crushed the democratic People's Uprising there. I'm sure this has got absolutely nothing to do with the fact that the U.S. Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. You can decide for yourselves. There's probably some sort of connection there. I doubt it's just a coincidence. And essentially what I'm saying is that it's our incessant consumption that is behind this imperial ambition. That if we didn't have the U.S. Fifth Fleet there, and why is the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain in the first place? Because it's protecting the Strait of Hormuz and all of the oil that's coming out of the Persian Gulf. If we didn't have the U.S. Fifth Fleet there, would anybody in the White House really care as much about the democratic freedom uprising in Bahrain? No. It'd be like Tunisia. They'd be like, "You go, girl. Like, do it. Make it happen." Instead, the Saudis send in troops, they crush the whole thing, and no one says anything. Again, because there's a major U.S. military base there. And so the rule of law and security in that case comes before freedom and democracy.
Jason, I'll just tell you, they heard from a Bahraini journalist. We had a Skype interview.
Oh, good.
Who works out of Washington, D.C., not out of London. She told them about the
She
democracy
did.
movement part of it, but not the part you're talking about.
Not the Fifth Fleet.
No, but the
Yeah.
democracy uprising being crushed and how difficult it was for people to carry on, but how they were still.
And how different that is, right, from how the U.S. just treated, let's say, Egypt or Tunisia or other countries, right? If there's nothing on the line, it's really easy to sit back and say, go ahead, stand up for democracy. And if there's a lot on the line, like the massive amounts of oil that are coming out of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, etc., then you're going to say something different. Again, don't take my word for it. Here's former CIA Director James Woolsey, who was director of the CIA for 2 years in the Clinton administration. He says, "The heart of the matter is oil. Coal is a problem from the point of view of CO2 emissions and pollution, but oil is a problem for those reasons and for reasons of national security, and that our billions of dollars a day that we borrow to import oil finances institutions like Saudi Wahhabi schools around the world that teach little boys murderous hatreds of Shiite Muslims, Jews, homosexuals, and apostates. not to mention hatred of Americans and the terrible oppression of women. And it helps fund murderous dictators around the world. We're paying for that, and it's nonsense. We need to stop using oil, not just imported oil, but oil period, in order to move away from that kind of thing. Those numbers, again, have changed a little bit. The U.S., before the massive fracking boom that's now taking place in North Dakota and other parts of the country, was importing about 60% of the oil we use a day. Even today, we're importing about 40% of the oil we use a day. But that still hasn't changed the essential calculus that we're spending close to $1 billion every day to buy oil from other countries. Probably right now it's about $750 million, but it's still a nice chunk of change, right? And think about how that just warps U.S. foreign policy, how it warps our interests around the world to keep that oil flowing so we don't have an oil crisis that would crush the economy. Here's another CIA director. This is General Michael Hayden. He was director of the CIA from 2006 to 2009. And he's addressing here less the point about oil for Americans, but kind of what happens when people don't have access to their basic needs. When they just can't have a life in dignity, right? When they don't have clean water, healthy foods, clean air, clean water for their families. He says today there's 7 billion people sharing the planet. By mid-century, the best estimates point to a world population of 9 billion. Just beyond the raw numbers, many countries will have a large concentration of young people. If their basic freedoms and basic needs, food, housing, education, unemployment, are not met, they could be easily attracted to violence, civil unrest, and extremism. You know, a lot of people have drawn a connection. You look at what happened in the Arab Spring a year and a half ago, and yeah, I mean, a lot of it was pent-up frustration at decades of U.S.-backed dictatorships not allowing people their basic freedom and democratic rights. But a lot of those protests were driven by very basic needs around not having enough to eat. There was a major global price spike in commodities that happened in the first part of 2011. Some folks might remember that the person who sparked the uprising in Tunisia was actually a street food vendor who set himself on fire to protest not only corruption within the Tunisian government, but also to protest the way that he just could not make a living. So again, if you have this huge global disparity, if you have this huge unfairness where 5% of the world's population consume 20% of the world's stuff, while vast numbers of people are just trying to make it, that's a recipe for instability. It's not a recipe for peace. I know that, you know, folks here who are history majors, this just sounds repetitive, right? There have always been conflicts over resources. People used to fight over gold, people who fought over land, people who fought over water, people fought over silver, people fought over cattle. Long before we had ethnic hatreds and wars over ideology or religion, people were fighting over stuff. The case that I'm making is that industrial society, with its massive demands for resources, have amplified that, have made it worse, right? More stuff means greater likelihood of having conflict, just because the demands of the system are so great that you've got to, again, keep the machine greased. I think one person who makes a good case for this is UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon. This quote is just from earlier this month. This is from actually it was in November, but it was like 2 weeks ago. He says, "There can be no peace if the resource base that people depend on for sustenance and income is damaged or destroyed, or if illegal exploitation finances or causes conflict." Right? So there's two things here. One is the first thing that former CIA Director Hayden was talking about. If people don't just have enough basic resources on which to live, there's going to be war and conflict and fighting, right? So that's the first part of what Ban Ki-moon is saying here. The second, though, is in some ways a little more interesting, is that if illegal exploitation, and right here he's talking about exploitation of resources, finances or causes conflict. So this is the idea that people are going to fight over diamonds, right? Or they're going to fight over gold. And then that's going to fuel conflicts. This is what's called the Dutch curse or the oil curse, right? It's that, yeah, it seems really great at first if you discover oil in your country until everybody starts fighting over the oil. And until a military dictatorship says, you know what, this is so valuable, we're going to lock down the political system because we just can't have the instability of democracy on top of all this resource. That's what happened in Nigeria for decades, right? You had military dictatorship after military dictatorship trying to make sure that they had control of this asset. People are fighting over it. And you've got clan warfare and ethnic warfare as people battle over these resources. It was interesting then what Secretary Bond said right after that. He named a class of metals that most people probably don't think of. Coltan, tungsten, and what's the other one? Tantalum. So anybody know what these things are used for?
All for electronics, I know coltan is used in cell phones.
Yeah, they're all used for electronics. These are a class of what we call rare earth metals that are found only in a few places and are basically the 21st century version of oil. I mean, oil is still dispensable, but especially for all these gadgets we have, like my nice iBook here, my cell phone, and the stupid adapter I had to buy today so that this computer could talk to the Sonoma State's computers. All of this stuff runs on a very small class of metals, and some of them, it's like 20% of the world's coltan is in the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Since 1998, somewhere between, and the estimates vary widely, somewhere between 2 million and 5 million people have died in civil wars, conflict, and conflict-related diseases and starvation in the Congo. 5 million people. And as Newsweek put it in an article just last year, a lot of this is due to basically a fight between the Congolese government and armed militias bludgeoning each other over who's got control of the mines, right? Because this is valuable stuff. This is valuable stuff if you want to create a Prius car battery or if you want to create a battery for your phone. So there's a very, very clear line between this and this. Like, that's a straight line. Just as it is. Anybody here heard about blood diamonds? Same deal. This is blood coltan. And yeah, there's all sorts of great groups. Go Google a group called Verite. It's Verite. That's trying to crack down on the trade and what they're calling conflict rare metals. But as we have demands for this, that is going to fuel the conflict that gets us to this. Now, maybe, and you guys have been talking about this all through this course and semester, maybe conflict is part of the human condition. I don't know. Maybe people just want to go bludgeon themselves over gold and silver and tungsten and coltan. That might be the case. I would suggest, though, that there's a way to at least reduce the incentives for war and conflict. That, as I started out saying when I was talking about no justice, no peace, if we can find a way to live more within our means, that we will have less cause to fight and have conflict. It's not that going green is going to eliminate war, but it does mean that living sustainably is a precondition for peace. That those things are connected. And so how do we do that? And again, I'm not asking that. It's not like every man's going to be an island. We're not all going to go live on some commune and grow our own food and not trade with anybody and go to some 21st century vision of autarky. I believe in international exchange. I like drinking coffee that comes from warmer parts of the world. I believe in kind of an international global civil society. But the idea is, if we can find a way to, again, live a little bit more gently on this earth so that we're not rapaciously consuming so much stuff, it will reduce the need to have the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. It will reduce the need to have 10 aircraft carriers while the rest of the world has got 11. It will reduce the need for this guy holding the gun next to these poor miners who are just trying to dig a little coltan out of the ground for your cell phone. This really gets in. I'm just going to offer I've got nothing more to offer today except for bumper sticker wisdom. And this is the oldie but a goodie. Live simply so that others may simply live. Right? If you can find a way to think about, okay, how can we start using less stuff so that we don't have this giant international system that is going to fuel conflict. There's a couple of really simple things. I don't think this is not rocket science, right? It's turning off the coal and turning on the wind, right? It's thinking about, okay, how can we be more self-sufficient in our own energy resources so that we're not having to go all around the world and drill for oil, displace people from their lands, which causes resentment and anger, and then ship it halfway around the world again. How can we think about the resources that are here right away? From a giant atomic reactor that's totally wireless called the sun. and get our energy from that, right? Get our energy from the sun and the wind and the waves, and have a measure of self-sufficiency in our energy. How can we get out of our cars and get on our bikes? This is not always feasible. I totally recognize that. I had to drive here today. I would just as soon ride a light rail. If they had a light rail that went from north of the Golden Gate Bridge to right up here in Roanoke Park, I'd be on it. It would save me the headache of trying to find parking in your guys' parking lot. I'm a little stressed getting in here because I spent 10 minutes looking for parking. I'd rather not look for parking, right? This is a simple way, of course, that people around the world are find, okay, there's different ways of meeting our own transportation needs that, again, that are not so dependent upon so much fossil fuels. How do we stop eating industrialized food? The average U.S. American food right now goes 1,000 miles on average from farm to fork, okay? And embedded in that, of course, is all other energy usage, right? All of the energy usage that's required just to ship it to you and to process it and to grow it. And so if we can somehow go from an industrialized food system to more, I guess what you could call a local or organic food system. This is an outdated photo of the farm I co-manage in San Francisco. Then we can reduce the overall resource burden we're having. And that doesn't mean, again, just eating the 100-mile diet, but it does mean being mindful about, okay, how do we support local farmers and ranchers and fishermen and dairymen and farmers, et cetera, and find a way so that we're meeting our basic human need in a way that's more sustainable. It means going from clear-cutting forests. This is I'm sorry, all these photos are kind of washed out. This is a photo of a clear-cut forest in Borneo for industrial palm cultivation. How do we go from that, where we're, again, basically strip mining resources, cutting down and burning these forests in Borneo, to something that's a little bit more, whoa.
Go back to the other
How did I do that? Look at the mouse. Thanks, Danny. That was a lot. How do we go from this, which again is industrial palm oil cultivation, to this super biodiverse vineyard in, I think this is here in Sonoma. Actually, it's in Mendocino County, just north of here. This is, again, it's not rocket science, and I think in general what this leads to is a higher quality of life, not a sacrifice. Almost all these pictures, and sure, I've framed it rather, gruesomely between the horrible belching smokestack and the nice windmills and the traffic jam that no one wants to be in, and the fun critical mass in Manhattan, and the yucky looking Big Mac, and the cool organic farm in San Francisco. But that's the point I'm trying to make, right? Is that this is an increase in quality of life. This isn't a sacrifice. I would much rather, when I have the choice between going from my office in Berkeley to the farm I co-manage in San Francisco, I would much rather ride BART than drive. I only drive if I have to take something to the farm. Because basically BART's more comfortable, right? I can sit there, I can read a book, I can read a magazine, I don't have to be stressed out about the traffic, and that's just easier than actually driving into San Francisco, which is totally ulcer-inducing, right? Same thing with the windmill. People are like, oh, the windmills are going to be on the ridgelines, they're going to mess up the view. I mean, if those folks live next to a mountaintop removal coal mining site, a mountaintop removal coal mining site is not beautiful, nor is a large coal power plant, or the tar sands of Alberta, Canada. I think across the board, making this transition from the industrial gray economy that we're in now to the more ecologically biomimicking green economy that we're headed towards will be an overall improvement in our health, in our welfare, and I would also like to think international security. It'll make us happier, it'll make us healthier, and what I'm offering you tonight is it'll make us more peaceful. So with that, I would love to hear any questions, comments, observations, challenges you guys might have. So thank you for listening. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you. Yeah.
You said there's a San Diego windmill factory trying to happen?
Did I say a San Diego windmill factory trying to happen?
That's what I thought you said.
I said maybe light rail in Sonoma County?
Just kidding.
I
I don't know, I'm from there and that just would never happen.
My understanding is that most of the the windmill for the big turbines is actually like in Colorado and Iowa. Don't ask me why. I mean, this is an interesting point that kind of brought up, which is What's one of the major companies interested in windmill production and construction in this country? Small little company, I'm sure nobody's heard of it. It's called General Electric. And General Electric's Westinghouse unit is one of the major manufacturers of windmill turbines in this country. And that, I mean the big ones, right? Not like the little ones you see at the Altamont Pass. You know, if you guys go through the Altamont Pass, or if anybody lives, you know, your folks live down around Palm Springs, most of those windmills are outdated, right? Those windmills are Carter era windmills that were put up mostly as experiments to see which ones work. The real ones that work now, the ones that are like, 80 yards tall, like 250 feet tall. There's actually 2 new ones along the 5. If anybody's driven on the 5 recently, there's one actually near a Safeway warehouse, which is kind of random, and there's another one near Harris Ranch. This is the future, and it's really unfortunate if you guys want to, go get involved in something right now where you can make a difference. And again, the interesting thing about what I'm trying to say here is that it's like you don't need to go to a peace march. Just you can contribute to an effort to have a more peaceful world by living a little bit more sustainably. There's something you can do right now. There's something you can do right after this class, right? And one of those things would be Google the wind production tax credit, which unfortunately is going to expire, or is set to expire. I think at the end of this year, they're trying to renew it. It became actually sort of an issue in the recent presidential campaign, because Mitt Romney was saying, no, we don't want to extend the wind production tax credit. And Obama was saying, yes, extend it. And I would say, yes, extend it. Like, this is a basic thing. We've been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry for 100 years. It seems like the least we can do is subsidize the clean energy industry, windmills, solar, hydropower, or small-scale hydropower, and tidal power to get them to the same point. So, no, there's probably no wind turbine factory in San Diego that I know of, but I'm sure there are tons of places in San Diego that could use some wind turbines.
You're talking about U.S. military in Africa. I was just wondering what the soldiers there are actually doing, because they're not like fighting.
That's a great question. Okay, well, some of them, so this map would prove helpful. So anything that's the blue color means more than 1,000 troops. The largest group of soldiers there is in Djibouti there. I believe there's still a sizable U.S. Air Force presence in Morocco, right? That's right south of Spain. I think, well, actually south of Morocco is Western Sahara. There's also some rare earth metals there. In general, most of these 662 facilities, they're training local. Most of them are trainers, right? That's like the number one thing of those 662 military installations, U.S. military officials are there training local troops. Why would you do that? Basically because it builds affinity, right? Because then everybody's going to become buddies and chummy, and you build relationships. And so when you have need to then deploy U.S. troops there, you've got those relationships to build on. It's interesting to see, you do see a use of military facilities in Somalia, which is kind of interesting on this map. I don't really know what's up with that. That'd be kind of interesting to look into.
So you say that there's kind of a relationship between the way you live sustainably and the military budget. I was just wondering, because I saw the graph drop big time in like the 90s. Do we live more sustainable, or what was the cause for the military drop?
That's a great point. No, I can't say that we were living any more, that the 90s was this golden age of eco-living. If only. No, basically because you had less of a threat to compel those massive military budgets, because there was political pressure then to say, listen, we're going to get a massive peace dividend from the end of the Cold War, 1998. Right, 98, 99, you've got military budget of 550. The Cold War ends, and people start cutting the expenditures. You still did have a massive military across the globe. There's no question about it. Mostly in bases in Europe, South Korea, other parts of South America. So no, the 90s were equally a time of us living well beyond our means, for sure. The question is, why can we not at least get back to that level? Right? Like, why could you not? The interesting thing is, in the debt and in budget negotiations that are happening right now, they're talking about, okay, maybe we'll cut around $800 million over 10 years. if you cut $70 million a year out of the U.S. military budget, excuse me, $70 million out of the U.S. military budget, you're still talking $630 million a year, right? Which is still far higher than we were any time during the 1990s. So why couldn't you go to the 1990 levels, a peacetime economy, and you'd still have a massive military? You'd still be spending more than the next 5 or 6 largest spenders combined. You had a follow-up question?
Well, I mean, so you're suggesting that it's more sustainable to drop our military budget, is that correct?
I'm saying the military budget is unnecessary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But if we do more sustainable, we'll drop our military budget.
for sure.
But right there, it shows that we just need to like stop causing like many problems in the world.
For sure. That would be the great first start would say, we don't need an $800 million, we don't need a $700 million military, right?
Yeah.
So if we got to that point, you said, okay, I think we can live with a $350 million military, okay, in constant dollars. Then you could go from there and say, why do we have the $350 million military in the first place? Could we live with a $100 million military? Billion. Thank you.
Jason, I would like to ask you something or state something and you can comment on it, but it really relates to what you're talking about, is that the rationale for the policymakers that led to that buildup was directly to project American power and secure oil in the Middle East. I mean, I don't know if you still think that Iraq had anything to do with 9/11, but they didn't, right? But yet that's where we invaded, and you can look in documents that a group called the Project for a New American Century wrote in 1999, before 9/11 happened, saying that this is what we need to do, build up our military defense. I'm sure Jason knows about these things too, right? So I think it does,
Yeah.
Your argument is actually still working there because it was the rationale to protect the oil that I think went to justify that buildup and that projection of military force and that huge increase of spending.
I think the real problem we're seeing, I mean, that's true, yes. Please go Google Project for a New American Century, which is the neocons idea of how we're going to sort of, again, project American power well into the 21st century. What we're seeing now, why we're stuck at that point, is because of the military-industrial complex, which again is a phrase coined by Dwight Eisenhower, is not coined by Tom Hayden, right? Essentially, I mean, this is one of the great lines. It actually came up in the vice presidential debate. And the questioner, Martha Raddatz, asked Paul Ryan, she said, I've got a question here from an officer in the U.S. military who says he's disappointed about American democracy. It seems to be all about giving favors to interest groups and not doing what's best for the country. And Paul Ryan said, I agree with that military officer, and that's why we're going to give more money to the military. I mean, literally, it's like he didn't hear the question. It was like he heard military, and he thought, throw more money at the problem. I do think actually one of Obama's better lines was, Romney wants to give the military money that the military is not even asking for. I mean, part of the reason why we're seeing these constantly unsustainable military budgets is because people love bringing those projects home to their district. Because people say, listen, we just ordered 10 new jet fighters, and that's going to mean a bunch of jobs for this district. Essentially, it's going to be severing a little bit of those relationships between members of Congress and the defense contractors in their district. But to your larger point of like, what is the connection between these two things? First of all, let's just get us down to the 1990 level, and then you push and say, again, why do we really need this stuff? Why do we need 10 aircraft carriers? Oh, Danny, you're going to have a softball. Someone else is going to have a hard question for me like this guy did. Anybody? You're about to raise your hand.
It's because, as you said, it's the offensive. The more power, the more strength that we have, the more weapons we have, the less chance that somebody's going to attack us. So why do we have 10 aircraft carriers? It's so that no other nation can attack us and we're inferior, or they're inferior.
So you think it's a projection of, essentially it's a preemptive strike kind of thing?
Yes.
You think it's a massive deterrence? Like we need all of that as a deterrence?
By having military so expensive, so in such a significant amount, the goal is to deter other nations from attacking us. So I do see it as an offensive, not a defensive. I see it as a deterrent. Is $750 billion unnecessary? Yes. but I see why the military does it.
I guess I would point out that you don't need all of that to be a deterrence. Again, an aircraft carrier is about projecting power, not about defending your shores. If we're really concerned about like an assault against the west coast of North America, you don't need 5 aircraft carriers.
But the thing is, or the way I see it, is if you have that many aircraft carriers, there's an attack on the west coast, that nation that attacked us will understand that they'll be attacked immediately after, because they'll have aircraft carriers close to their shores.
Yeah, I mean,
That's where the deterrent lies, is what I see.
yeah, it seems to me an overwhelming deterrent.
Overwhelming, yes.
Yeah.
But I see what the military's doing.
I think also on that, I mean, just listening to what you're saying, I think you're simplifying something that's very complex. This is not a matter of Republican or Democrat issue. This is a matter of the world. I mean, you have in the 40s, you have Democratic president entered us into World War. You have a Democratic president in World War I who entered us into the world we see today. I mean, this is a very difficult issue because following World War I, you have the League of Nations, which ultimately fails, and then you have the introduction of the United Nations, which we see today. I see it as a failure. I know other people in this room think it's a great thing, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have it where you're going to control and police and help the world in a sense, and then sit here and, I feel, demonize a country that has been put in a role, or has accepted the role, I shouldn't say put, they've accepted the role following Britain. They've accepted the role of helping the world become better in a way, but that comes with ramifications as we see with Libya, where we went in and helped these people, supposedly helped them, even though we know Libya held source of oil. We take over, we leave, and then you have this, you have Benghazi, which happened a couple of months ago. Happened there. I mean, I understand what you're saying and what you're getting to, but I feel it's so complex that it's not as easy as, like Ron Paul likes to say, bring them all home and let's just let everybody take care of what they got to do. Because the end result would be eventually it's coming to your door. So I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I feel this is very more complex than what you delivered. I appreciate what you said, but at the same time, I think it's much, much more complex.
Well, I'll agree that it's complex, and I would agree with you that this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is a bipartisan consensus of the American foreign policy establishment. It does not matter whether President Obama is in the White House. I mean, it matters to a degree, but Republican and Democratic presidents since the end of World War II, or if you want to put it since the end of World War I, have supported these policies. You are totally right there. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is, in general, the consensus of the U.S. foreign policy establishment. In terms of we're taking over, you said, we're taking over the role that Britain once had. So we had a Pax Britannica, right? The sort of piece of Great Britain under which everybody supposedly thrived. And now we've got a Pax Americana. I don't know that anybody asked for a Pax Americana. I don't know that anybody said, we really want to be under your defense umbrella. Now, some people did. Obvious example would be, say, South Korea, which appreciates certainly the U.S. Military presence there because they see that as a deterrent to North Korea. I think, Japan did in some ways after World War II and is now kind of under the U.S. umbrella, defense umbrella. But there are great portions of the world who never asked for a Pax Americana and did not ask for America to hold itself up as
How
a
about the
city.
American people themselves? Did we ask for a Pax Americana?
Or did we ask for this expenditure?
No, I definitely agree with when you say that we didn't, no one really asked, but I feel like when you start something like the League of Nations or United Nations, when you start something where you say, guess what, if there's ever a problem, we're going to be there to help you, the situation becomes so complex that at the end, you're, like right now, you're helping Israel create a defensive mechanism so whoever is attacking them can attack. But then on the other side, you're helping Saudi Arabia by giving them money at the same time. I mean, it becomes so complex and so like a spider web that there's really no way out once you've gotten in. And I think the worst thing we ever could have done as a nation was enter such a pact to say, yeah, I'll be there to help you. Like, yeah, I'll be there because we are the dominant let's be honest, we are the dominant country in the world right now,
Militarily,
militarily and financially, depending on how you look at it.
depending on how you look at it.
But if you look at it from that standpoint, everyone's going to look at the top down and say, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing? So you can kind of get this big brother role model complex type thing, and you see that's kind of what really happened. If you break it down from like 1915, 1940 era, you kind of see America's complex kind of changing, kind of shifting with different presidents and whatever else. So, and again, I think what you said is true. It's very, very complex. You have spider webs and fissures and God knows whatever else happened. You try to remember who you were helping yesterday and who was helping who, and then you find out so-and-so was helping somebody else. And, you know, I mean, you look at Iraq. I mean, Iraq started with Saddam Hussein. We put him in power to take out Iran. That doesn't work. And then we, you know, I mean, for example, now we're at war in Iraq because of what we did in Iran, but Iran's still there. We're back in Egypt, and we're back in Egypt, but the Brotherhood of Muslims is back in Egypt, so now you have a bigger problem there. So it's...
You're not sure you have a bigger problem there. It depends on, I mean, again, so the question is it a problem if the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi is in power in Egypt? Why is that a problem exactly for people in Rohnert Park? It's not. But you said that because that's kind of what's like on, because that's a lot of the dominant discourse. It's like, oh, if the Islamists get in power, we're going to be in trouble. Well, why? I mean, that's important to like really question that assumption. I do think you're totally right that it is very complicated, and finding a different way for Americans and America to live on this planet is going to be complicated. You're right. It is not as simple as a Ron Paul soundbite. Ron Paul saying like, pull them out, we're all going to go home.
No, I'll be quiet. It wasn't that they were...
You know, there was another person here that wanted to ask
I
a
just
question.
finished it. There's last thing. It's not that it's important to us. It's the message in which the ideology in which America is spreading. We're saying that we want democracy, but yet, you know, if you're going to back someone like in Egypt, and they're obviously not spreading democracy,
Right.
that lessens your argument. So that's what I'm saying. So
It does, exactly right. It does lessen your argument if you say we're a beacon of freedom and democracy, and then you allow what happens in Bahrain, you allow, you know, Mubarak to rule in Egypt for decades, you overthrow Mossadegh. Who here has seen Argo? Only a couple people. Well, anyway, the first like 5 minutes of Argo is the best little capsule of U.S.-Iranian politics you'll see. And again, if you overthrow democratic elected governments, it will blow back in your face. We have one more? No?
Did you have a question? Did you have a hand raised before? No. Was it you?
Okay, may I ask a question? Is there a student who's got a question, please do.
It's just 6 years. We still have time.
You had a question?
Yeah, I guess like I'm a geography minor, so I've kind of been exposed to certain things like that you talked about. But the question, at least for me, like the question lies like I've changed a lot of my ways of living to more sustainable way. But I mean, I think, or I guess like the question is like, what could be the shifts in the government to actually move towards sustainable, like I feel that if the government doesn't move towards a sustainable direction, then people are just, no matter, I feel like even if there's strong numbers of people trying to live that way or make movements, like there has to be a higher power to shift that way. Like if companies, instead of trying to invest in like the profit would be the main priority, if they were to shift for sustainability like factor, then that would be I think that would be the only way to actually move our entire society to a sustainable way of living.
So the question is like, how do we get the government to be an ally rather than an obstacle to making a shift to a green economy? I mean, some of this, right, just happened a number of weeks ago with the election, right? You vote for the people who you think are going to express your values, and hopefully they'll express your values around sustainability. There were some great things that were in the first Obama stimulus package. About 1/10 of that went to energy retrofits, went to the clean energy system, etc. I actually think that more can happen at the state and federal and local, the state and local level than at the federal level. I mean, there's some really important things that the federal government can and should do. but a lot of it I think is about thinking about, okay, what are the changes that could happen right here in Sonoma County, right here in Roanoke Park, right here in the state of California to move the economy. The government can't do it all. The government at best is going to be a midwife, or is going to sort of, grease the tracks to make the changes happen. Fundamentally, it's going to have to come from people and citizens, and then entrepreneurs and consumers to make these changes. But you look at one simple thing, like here in the state of California, the way that we set utility prices, we use half as much energy per capita as the state of Florida. Okay? And it's not like the California economy is hurting. If every state in the country decided to have the same utility rate pricing as California did, this country would use not exactly half, but close to half as much electricity as it's using right now. I mean, that'd be overtime. It would take a while for it to all kick in. There are some very simple things that we could do through public policy. How do we get the government to do that? It's basically by making a stink, right? And voting for the people you think are going to put those policies into place, and when they are then in office, continuing to push them. The work isn't over. I was driving up here and I was listening to something on NPR, and they were interviewing this guy, Thomas Ricks, who's written a couple of books about the idea of kind of generalship and how to be a good general. He said the problem with all the generals going into Iraq and Afghanistan, they thought after they took the capital, the war was over. No, once you take the capital, the war just started, right? It's like they took Baghdad, they took Kabul, and then the war started. To kind of stretch the metaphor, once you elect the representatives you want into Congress or the State House or the presidency, that's when the effort starts. That's not where the effort ends. The effort starts now. The effort starts as soon as the next inauguration happens, right? That's and the new Congress is in session. That's when the effort really happens to get smart public policies that, again, will allow us to not be living beyond our means. The physics and the chemistry don't care whether you care. And it's like, who's ever been at like just even a house party thing? If you get too many bodies in a room, it starts to get too hot. This is now happening on a planetary scale. We're on this single house called planet Earth, and there's 7 billion of us, and there's too many people in the room. And we are starting to overheat the room. And so time is really running out on climate change. And that's going to be actually the national security thing where a lot of this really comes to a head. When you start seeing massive floods and weather disruptions that are starting to affect harvests, then things are really going to get very complicated. And some of these same folks that I quoted today, like James Woolsey and Michael Hayden, are kind of really at the front of folks who understand how bad it could get. So if you're not already involved with groups like, say, 350.org or Energy Action or the California Student Sustainability Coalition, check them out, because that's a place to make your voice heard, to say, like the Keystone, who here heard about the Keystone XL pipeline? A couple folks, okay, that's pretty good. So again, they want to run this giant pipeline from the tar sands of Alberta, Canada, down to the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Everybody thought it was a done deal. 1,200 people got arrested at the White House, and President Obama put it on hold. It'll be really interesting to see if Obama lets it go through or not. It's going to be kind of like the first major environmental test of the second term. But that never would have happened if 1,200 people hadn't gone out and gotten arrested in front of the White House gates. That was the largest display of civil disobedience on an environmental issue in 20 or 30 years. So that's how you do it. You just have to kind of, get up, stand up.
Jason, I know you didn't talk about it a lot this time, but do you want to say just a little bit about your own personal shift into farming? We have till quarter after.
Sure, and there's a couple also. Folks want the environmental magazine I edit. There's copies here, and there's some leaflets. So I split my time between editing an environmental magazine called Earth Island Journal and co-managing an urban farm in San Francisco County called Alamany Farm. And the idea is to show people a little bit how even in a place like San Francisco, even on a small little 3 acres wedged between 10 lanes of freeway and a 165-unit public housing complex, you can grow about 5 tons of food a year. And that is not going to save the world, right? 5 tons of organic fruits and vegetables is kind of just, icing on the cake. But it is a little bit of a demonstration about how you can really reclaim some of your time. I mean, I make a financial sacrifice. I'm not salaried full-time at the magazine, but then I've got more time. I'd rather have more time than more money. That's a personal choice, right? But what it means, right, is that like no one is at the office being like, where's Jason? Like, all right, that guy's only salaried at 75% time, so he might not be here today. Obviously, I get all my work done that needs to get done, but I would rather have the freedom and the leisure than the money. And I guess this also gets back to the idea between switching off between quality of life. That in the U.S. over the past 40 years, we've basically traded time for stuff. Right? We have far fewer vacation days than people in Europe. In fact, we've got a month less vacation time than people in Germany. It's not like people in Germany are suffering, right? They're doing just fine. In fact, even the Germans are probably living beyond their means if you were to kind of put it on a global scale. And they're working a month less.
But they've gone solar.
And they've also gone solar. They've got no sun. And they've got the largest solar industries in the world. Another great example of how if you've got the right government policies in place, you can really jumpstart something incredible. I forget what the latitude is of Berlin, but I mean, it's like the same latitude as like Bangor, Maine or something, and it's cloudy all the time, and they've got more installed rooftop solar than any country on earth. Because they put in place smart government policies, and because the German government is committed to making a transition to renewable energy. So that was kind of a digression, but yes, I mean the Germans have also made a little bit, even though they're probably the fourth biggest economy on the planet, they've decided we'd rather have more time and a little bit less stuff. That in the end is going to give you a higher quality of life. We could make the same decision here in the US. It will be slow, like someone said it's going to take time. Yes, it will take time to make a cultural change like that. All of this is cultural change, right? It's not policy change. It's not something that you just decide to do and it happens overnight. But this is part of the culture changing right here, right? Having these conversations, having these disagreements. This is what the work looks like. One more, come on, one more.
Danny, you have a question?
No, Denny's good. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for the good questions. Really appreciate it.